ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਪੱਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁਖੜਾ ਲੁਕਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਨੀਵੀਆਂ ਤੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਚੀਰ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਪੱਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁਖੜਾ ਲੁਕਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਐਵੇਂ ਕਰੀ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਚ ਕੇ ਰਹੀ ਨੀ ਤੂੰ ਹੁਣੇ ਹੁਣੇ ਹੋਈ ਮੁਟਿਆਰ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਚ ਕੇ ਰਹੀ ਨੀ ਤੂੰ ਹੁਣੇ ਹੁਣੇ ਹੋਈ ਮੁਟਿਆਰ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਚ ਕੇ ਰਹੀ
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 10th episode of the podcast series, The Rise of the Global South, self-funded and produced by Enjoy Vintage Sustainable Fashion, a no-profit association free from any commercial and political power. The title of today's episode is The Indian Dragoon is Firing Back, and we will delve into this conversation later on, but before we go further, on a personal note today, I would like to dedicate this episode in memory of my good friend and mentor Mimmo Aleotti. Mimmo has been my web designer and consultant for years, and back in 2024 he gave me the idea of launching this podcast. And believe me, we will not be here today if it wasn't for Mimmo. Unfortunately, he left us in December due to an evil illness, but his memory lives through his work and legacy. Ciao, Mimmo. Okay, so let's start with the presentation. So today's episode is focusing on a very historical deal, the EU-India Free Trade Agreement. The Free Trade Agreement was reached during the India-EU Summit in New Delhi in January 2026 between the India Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the President of the European Council Antonio Costa, and the President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. This deal will strengthen a new commercial corridor between the European countries and India. Based on the official EU statement, the summit sealed an historic commercial deal between two major democracies, India and the EU. Questionable definition, especially when in India child marriages, child labor, and infringements of human rights are still enabled. But let's look at the trade picture. The EU is India's largest trading partner. India is the EU's 9th largest trading partner. The export for the EU are agro-food, chemical, pharmaceutical, machinery, medical devices, avionics, and automotive industries. For India, we have incoming into Europe fisheries, chemicals, textile, footwear, and pharmaceuticals. The EU will eliminate tariffs on over 90% on the India export. India will eliminate tariffs on 86% of EU export. The stock of India's FDI, the foreign direct investment in the EU, is already exceeding 10 billion euros. We already have 6,000 European companies based in India. Obviously, these numbers will grow following the agreement reached on the mega deal between India and the EU. But let's have a look also at one of the historic EU partners. I'm talking about the transatlantic deal between the EU and the US. On the 4th of February 2026, the European Parliament unfreezed the EU-US trade deal. The EU lawmakers last Wednesday agreed to resume enforcement of the EU-US trade deal. The member of the European Parliament, MEP Bernd Lang, who is also the chair of the Parliament's Trade Committee, has declared that the committee could vote on the agreement on the 24th of February. The agreement could be suspended in the future depending on Trump's next move on Greenland. Representatives of the European Parliament have agreed on the conditions to attach to the deal a sunset clause, which will make the agreement expire at the end of March 2028. They also asked for a suspension clause to suspend the deal, in fact, in the event that the US will threaten the territorial integrity of one of the EU member states. And I believe in this case, they're also referring to Greenland. The agreement sets US tariff at 15% on EU export, while the EU committed to cutting its tariff on US goods to zero. But its approval is proven controversial in recent weeks due to Trump's threats to take control of Greenland. So, in conclusion, the EU is imposing severe clauses on the US in regard to the Greenland issues, but is willing to reduce tariff with India up to 90%, despite the infringements of human rights, child labor, and child marriages still enabled across the country. Now, on a final note, my questions here I have 4 questions. The first one, and I hope we can find sort of solution today. The first question is this new commercial era going to affect both economies? What is going to happen to the SME, to the small, medium enterprises, both in India and Europe? Are the small sustainable fashion brands based in Europe at risk? How comfortable is Europe in trading with a country where basic human rights are still going unnoticed in the 21st century? Finally, there is a strong bias feeling towards the US, but when it's down to India, the EU leadership is willing to close both eyes. Question mark? So that's all from me. And just want to mention, and I'm going to share with you my sources, which are the official website of the EU, the European Union, and my other sources are from coming from Euro News channel. So that's all from me. And let me introduce our speakers for today. We have only 2 speakers, and this is quite bizarre because all my speakers coming from India, based in India or in Europe, they first confirmed, some of them confirmed, and then in the end, they just canceled their attendance or they all fell ill. They all came down with a flu. But luckily, we have these 2 brave ladies who are here with us today. And I would like to introduce you, first of all, my co-host and permanent panelist to the podcast, Dr. Liane Thiel-Rutkowski. Dr. Liane Thiel-Rutkowski, she's a researcher, a strategist. She's based in Boston, US. She's a leader in intersection of sustainable fashion, indigenous governance, creative economics, and system innovations. Her works challenges dominant global north narratives in sustainability and reframes cultural production. She's the founder and CEO of the Impact Fashion Hub, which is a US-based nonprofit dedicated to ethical global textile futures, regenerative creative economies, and cultural sovereignty in design. Please welcome Dr. Liane Thiel-Rutkowski.
Good morning, and thank you so much. Good morning, Nkunda. Good morning, Erie. And good morning, Michael. And thank you so much for your invitation to to continue this critical discussion. So I was thinking about how to approach this, and I decided to do it as per my usual methodology, and I like to approach things structurally. So there's nothing personal about any of this. It's purely structural. And I want to begin by stating clearly the position from which I'm actually speaking today, not speaking as a European regulator, nor as an Indian domestic analyst. Today, I speak as an American observer of global trade systems and as an author examining how historical power structures continue beneath modern economic arguments. So I just thought that would be the best way to approach this. My work, Beneath the Ice, which is my forthcoming book on the interactions between Greenland and Denmark, in the sovereignty issues and so forth. So my work, Beneath the Ice, argues that many contemporary frameworks reproduce colonial administrative logic under the language of sustainability, partnership, and democracy. So I want to begin with a question. When two entities describe themselves as major democracies entering an historic agreement, what does democracy really mean inside the supply chains? And that's where my world intersects in the fashion industry. Is democracy measured by institutions or by the lived reality of workers whose names we actually never learn? So then we approach this by looking at the myth of neutral trade. Trade agreements are often presented as neutral mechanisms, but trade is never neutral. Trade determines whose labor becomes invisible, whose environment absorbs risk, and whose economies expand, and who remains dependent. As Americans, we have already lived through the promises of globalization framed as efficiency, and we have learned that efficiency without ethics becomes displacement. Communities are emptied, factories are closed, and I am living proof of that here in Boston, in the New England area. These are lived experiences. Production relocated to spaces where regulation is weakest. So when I hear celebration of new trade alignments without strong human rights enforcement, I do not hear innovation. I hear repetition. Trade agreements do not create the future. They reveal what we are willing to ignore in order to reach it. Democracy as a narrative versus democracy as structure. We are told this agreement represents cooperation between these two democracies, but democracies cannot be constituted as a label. Democracy must be structural. It must exist where goods are made, not only where policies are signed. If child labor persists, if workers lack safety protections, if environmental harm remains externalized, then democracy has not reached the factory floor. And without democracy at the point of production, democratic trade becomes a contradiction. Structural silence. What is most revealing in many trade agreements is not what is included, but what we see is omitted. Silence around child marriage, in the case of India, unsafe labor environments, gender inequity in manufacturing. They're not accidental gaps. These are structural decisions. Market first, people later. But human dignity cannot be a secondary clause. It must be the foundation. A system that requires invisibility to function is not efficient. It is fragile. The European sustainability paradox. From an American vantage point, the EU presents itself as a sustainability leader. Yet we do observe these contradictions. strict environment expectations domestically, outsourced industrial risk globally. When sustainability becomes branding rather than redesign, it creates moral distance between consumers and producers, and distance is where accountability disappears. And I'm definitely running into that in the research, and you know, buckle up when my book comes out. Fashion, the X-ray of global trade. Fashion exposes the truth, and this is where my world intersects here. Fast fashion supply chains are the clearest illustration of global trade logic. Production migrates to where labor is cheapest. If you hear factories are opening in places like Myanmar, run for the hills. Enforcement weakest and transparency minimal. India plays a central role in these systems, but this is not an indictment of India. It is a critique of a global structure that rewards opacity. So this is not personal, this is structural. European brands in Western markets speak of sustainability while relying on supply chains designed for invisibility. So we have this. Sustainability without accountability is not transformation, it is storytelling. Okay. Close to my heart is the concept of Fabrica Veritatis, the governance of truth, the fabric of truth. Transparency is not a marketing tool. Transparency must be infrastructure. Imagine if every consumer could see real-time labor conditions, wage structures, and environmental impact. Entire industries would have to redesign overnight, which is precisely why true transparency is resisted, because visibility redistributes their power. The rise of the global south is a necessary reframing. It's the rise of the global south is actually, I read, is often celebrated. But the question is not whether the global south rises. The question is whether it rises within equitable systems or within redesigned versions of colonial hierarchies. Growth without power redistribution is not transformation, it's simply relocation. Strategic and basically my comment here is the opposite of exploitation is not growth. The opposite of exploitation is dignity. So basically the strategic realignment and ethical risk as US and European trade relations evolve as well. Strategic diversification is inevitable. But diversification without ethical elevation risks normalizing lower standards. Competition between trade blocs should drive higher protections, not ethical compromise. So I leave you with the final question. Would we celebrate this agreement if every hidden cost became visible? If every worker had a voice in the negotiation? If every environmental impact appeared on the product label? If the answer is uncertain, then we are not yet designing trade for justice. We are designing trade for continuity. And as we know, continuity is the one thing history has shown us we can no longer afford. Do I have any more time left?
Yes, Yen, you have more time.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up. Basically, how much time do I have? Because it'll determine what I cover.
How much do you have? Do you need?
A couple of days, maybe? No, I'm just kidding.
No, go on. I think another 5-10 minutes. Would that be enough? Okay.
Let's see. I can go through. Hopefully that, drove a few points for illuminating what really goes on, structurally. I thought maybe I should do this. The missing architecture of global trade. And basically I go through the World Trade Organization, UNCTAD, just briefly, if that's okay. Do you think that? I think it's applicable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Basically, in integrated governance, the missing architecture of global trade. Up to this point, we've talked about trade agreements as political narratives about democracy, sustainability, and partnership. But now I would like to shift the conversation because the deeper issue is not whether global trade is governed. The world does not lack trade governance, trust me. It lacks integrated governance where trade rules and human rights protections operate within the same enforceable framework. And this distinction changes everything. The illusion of a unified system is where many people assume there is a single global authority overseeing ethical trade. There is not. Instead, we have fragmented architecture. Trade rules do exist here. Human rights frameworks exist somewhere else. Labor protections live in another institution and entirely. And environmental governance occupies yet another sphere. Each system produces standards. And I was thinking about Michael, who is always so spot on, and his just a few comments to us before we hopped on. And really, he was with UNEP, and then, the Alliance for Sustainable Fashion came. So, you're jumping around. Is this okay? Is this okay? So we're trying to get this all together. But none possesses full authority across the entire structure. This fragmentation is not accidental. It is structural. Currently, it is structural. The World Trade Organization, economic governance without ethical integration. The WTO governs the mechanics of trade, tariffs, market access, dispute resolution. It's the closest thing to global trade regulation, but its mandate is economic efficiency, not human rights enforcement. And this creates a profound imbalance. Trade obligations are binding. Human rights expectations are often aspirational. It's kind of like the politician that promises the world, and then the minute they take over, it just aspirational is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, which means that in practice, economic rules carry legal force while ethical protections rely on voluntary compliance guidelines. From a governance perspective, this is not neutrality, it is prioritization. UNCTAD, the voice without enforcement. Now consider UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. UNCTAD produces some of the most critical analysis of structural inequality within global trade. It highlights power asymmetries. It addresses development disparities. It advocates for fairer participation of the global South. But UNCTAD cannot enforce. It advises, it analyzes, it recommends. Here we see the paradox. The institution best positioned to critique inequity lacks the authority to actually elicit change. The ILO, labor standards without trade teeth. Then we have the ILO establishing global labor standards, protection from forced labor, safety requirements, child labor prohibitions. These standards represent global ethical consensus, yet trade agreements rarely bind enforcement to ILO compliance with meaningful consequences. So we arrive at a system where trade is still flowing freely, labor protection depends on goodwill, and markets reward the lowest cost structures regardless of human impact. We have built a world where economic agreements are enforceable, but ethical agreements are negotiable. Fragmentation as a design feature. From the perspective of Beneath the Ice, my book, fragmentation is not simply bureaucratic complexity. It reflects historical administrative logic. Colonial governments separated economic extraction from moral responsibility, and today we see echoes of that structure. Trade expands, human rights react, but rarely do they operate within the same legal architecture. This allows supply chains to move quickly while accountability moves slowly. I'm wrapping up, Erie. Don't get nervous.
I'm okay. No, we are okay for time because
He's on a roll. No,
we are okay for time.
Fashion supply chains as proof. Fashion provides one of the clearest demonstrations of this fragmentation, basically. Brands operate within the World Trade Organization enabled trade structures. They reference UN sustainability language because they've got all the little colorful signs, 1, 2, 3. They cite ILO labor commitments. They publish ESG reports aligned with environmental frameworks. Yet the systems governing these elements remain separate, which means accountability becomes diffused. No single authority integrates trade legality, labor dignity, environmental responsibility, and human rights enforcement. And where integration does not exist, exploitation will find a space. The flashpoint. Where is the flashpoint? The future of ethical trade does not depend on more agreements. It depends on integration, a model where trade privileges are contingent on human rights performance, market access aligns with labor compliance, transparency becomes mandatory infrastructure and not a second thought, and governance stops treating ethics as an internal add-on. The problem is not globalization. The problem is globalization without integration. So we ask, what is the path forward? This is not about rejecting trade. It's about redesigning governance, integrating the World Trade Organization economic frameworks with ILO, labor enforcement, UN human rights mechanisms, and environmental accountability systems. And until these structures operate together, trade agreements will continue to promise transformation while reproducing inequality. Bah.
That was great. Thank you. Yes, you just nailed it. The point is just that we cannot by increasing the volume of business and creating these corridors, commercial corridors, with countries where human rights are just an opinion. We are only increasing with the volume of business. We are only increasing the number of sufferance, the sufferance of child labor, women rights broken. So that's the point. We should not, we as the Western countries, I'm saying the Western countries, not in a discriminatory way. But
no, it's not.
Western countries, we are always the one that preach about human rights. We preach about democracy, and then in the end, what we end up doing, exactly the same thing. We are enabling countries, commercially speaking, where all this volume of business, it will only be possible if they will increase the volume of people that actually suffer.
Okay? Exactly.
This is the point. So where is the moral issue in these mega deals? Okay. So Liane, thank you very much for your contribution, as always spot on, and I'm very happy today to introduce this young lady from Uganda. So Nankunda Fortunate. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly your name. Forgive me if I'm not. Fortunate Nankunda is a sustainable fashion designer, an educator, and a climate change advocate. She works at bringing together creative design, environmental education, advocacy, and administration. So all the key points put together. As a project coordinator and an administrator, she brings climate awareness into structure, impactful, and operational strategies. Fortunate brings different perspective on how sustainable systems, sustainable fashion, and grassroots climate action can be blended, bridging creativity, education, and organizational leadership into an inclusive change. Great. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Hi. So welcome. Really, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on this, and I think it is a big opportunity, like Mr. Mike has said. He said I'm introduced right, and when I heard this about this topic, and after you communicated that people are withdrawing from this topic, I was a bit concerned, and it was a shock to me. But I was not shocked as a person from the global south, because talking on these critical topics, yet you're from that country, it is a bit uh, not cool, not cool. And but yes, I accepted, because I'm from the global south, and I'm representing some people who don't have this opportunity. Maybe they didn't go to school, but they are fashion designers in a way, and they don't have the opportunity to reach into these platforms. So when I had this topic, I was intrigued as like, okay, we are talking about big deals. We are talking about big deals, and I got to remember that climate activism is not about condemning countries about what they are doing, about the systems, but it is telling them to be responsible for what they are doing, or for what they are going to cause. And from this deal, I recognized that yes, we are promoting trade. We are about the tariffs. Yes, they are going to increase. Everything is going to increase. But are we really looking beyond the tariffs? Are we looking beyond um, the GDP of the country? Are we looking beyond that? And rather look at the human rights, look at the environmental costs that that are going to be faced in this deal, or beyond this deal, because I believe it is like a ripple action, that you do it here and it will affect there. Yes, the deal in India, I believe, to someone who is making deals, or who is in that chair, in that seat, it is a big deal. It is a good thing. And to someone who is down here, like I said earlier, that to someone who is like me, it is not something to rejoice about. It is not, because you're not directly receiving from it, and also it is going to cause impact that you're going to directly. Yes, you're not benefiting it from it directly, but you're going to get the impact directly. When we talk about the fashion, importing and export, we are looking at the whole thing causing the so-called quick fashion. We are going to fast fashion, that we are going to see a lot of imports coming in. We are going to see a lot of production, but we are not concerned about that middle class or lower class peasant, or someone who has one tailoring machine and making the cloth that is going to be sustainable, because I believe it is they are not considering that person making that cloth, because I believe when there is fast fashion, of course the prices will go down, and when the prices go down, it means also the dropouts will increase in a way that the person who was paying paying for their child to go to school will not have that money to pay to go to for the child to go to school. So I believe that the deal is good. It is good, but for the people that directly receive from it, and also I think that the people making the deal is already happening. It is already signed. I think consultations would have been made before, and see on how these people can at least make sure that the people down there are benefiting from this. Yes, they'll be like, yes, we are benefiting, these people are going to benefit, they are going to get this and this, but I believe it is not. And then we talk about women rights. They are going to be ignored, because at the end of it all, here in the global south, can I specify like Africa or in the global south, mostly women. You're going to find most of the women in those industries working so hard. And when we say working so hard, we mean those fumes from the industries. You know, then at the end of the story, there are diseases, of course, that are going to come up. Then also looking at human rights, environmental rights, the trade, the exchange. I don't look at this deal as the exchange of goods for goods or services, but it is the amplification, can I say, of neocolonialism? Yes, it is an amplification of neocolonialism, as Dr. Lee has said, that you people have this thing of human rights, because I think it is more in the Western culture. Human rights, we are supporting human rights, we are supporting democracy, but when we reach in the implementation side, it is something different, because I don't believe these deals have these deals that we are signing. Yes, the global south is signing, it is a big deal, but also there are strings attached. Yeah, there are strings attached that we are going to get this percentage from it, and the end of it all, really, you see, not like we are not seeing, can I call it just transition to the democracy. We want to the human rights. There's no like, we are not seeing that just transition there. I believe when I talk about that just transition, like leaving no one behind. Yes, because when you leave someone who is working in that industry, that woman working in that industry, or that girl that is going to get married at 15, you're really leaving a lot of people behind. And I think I had a few points. Since maybe if I have more time, I would add after.
You do. Nankunda, it's very interesting what you're saying, because that's the point of all this mega deal. They made it look as if it's a great opportunity for both countries. They make it believe as if a great opportunity for India and for small, medium enterprises in Europe, when, as a matter of fact, it's not, because they will only increase production by keeping the same low standards. Yes,
so
that's the point. Do you want me to pull up your presentation, Nankunda?
I've already touched most of the points.
You have more time.
Yes, time. I still have more time.
Yes, you do.
Okay, so looking at this topic, I believe we are here. We are also going to strangle the existing Indian brands. Yes, at the end of it, they are going to get more brands in this thing. And the people that are already in, of course, there's can I call it competition. There will be an unfair competition, because there's the one that is sponsored. Yeah, the deal is sponsored, and there's someone who already has the existing brand and is going to compete with someone who is sponsored, and I believe that is unfair for that person. Then yes, I know there are laws. They have put the laws on how it is going to be managed. This is the percentage that we are going to keep 1.5. Yes, we're going to keep it, and I don't read that as hypocrisy. If you say that you're going to keep that percentage of maybe the what do they call it? The emissions. Yes, the emissions. That we're going to keep this percentage, and you exceed, and you find us. Let me let me try to relate it to climate activism, that you find us going to, and I call it COP, and you're running here and there in pledges, be like, okay, I think this is the pledge. They have polluted and they have pledged, and of course it remains on paper. It remains on paper, and that is hypocrisy. That it remains on paper. And some countries, when they be like, for us, we're not paying these things. I don't believe even in this thing called climate change. I don't believe in. Can they pull from big organizations that would have maybe sponsored, because there are, of course, there are climate organizations, maybe NGOs that don't really get directly from the environment. They get from those bodies. They write grants and they get. But if you pull, it means if you pull your financing, it means you're even, you're saying, okay, everything let it be. And at the end of it all, I don't believe even in climate. What is climate? So it is really hypocrisy. Then I've already talked about the fast fashion floods. Yeah, it is going to be a flood. And I'm sorry to talk about that, but it is going to be a flood. Yeah, it is going to be a flood. And when I talk about the flood, I talk about, I'm going back to that farmer. Because here in Global South, when growth increase and everything, take it to the village, to the people to get. And if you, I've made research like to the clothes that they send in the village, you find them in the backyards. And most of the people in the group, so they do farming and everything. And after finding it is going to affect even the person. Yes, it is fashion, but it's going to affect also the farmer in the village. It is going to affect the farmer in the village. And I believe that is, if I don't think they considered that in that deal. I think they considered the GDP and of course the tariffs. This is the big deal, and let's go with it. And at the end of it all, they're not going to fulfill the promises. Most of them, it is going to be. It was, and you have said that they have put. Can I call them regulations, that if this thing that it doesn't happen, then we pull off. Like, it is something I don't. Yes, it is good to the direct people that are getting from it, but it is not good for someone who is indirectly being affected by the effects of these things. I believe that is it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nankunda, for your witnessing today. And we totally agree with your point. Who is going to benefit from this big deal? So it's all a big lie, as always. I just wanted to show you a document that I found on the EU website. Obviously, you can find the agenda, you can find everything there. So this agreement is sold as an amazing opportunity for both India and the small companies, small enterprises in Europe. But it's not, as a matter of fact. If you look at the products that are going to be shipped over the countries, it's all about, avionics, pharmaceuticals. So it's all the big powers, once again, the industries that actually control the world, machineries. So who is going to produce machineries? It's not going to be a small company, a small artisan. It's going to be a mega, multinational company. So once again, this deal, it's all a big facade, a big lie. They're just selling, once again, what they got, And if you look here at the snapshot, you can see that India and the EU, they were already partners. They've been partnering for years. So I wonder why just now this big mega deal? Maybe it was, and then after a few weeks, there is another meeting in Washington, and there is another meeting where they are talking about unfreezing the EU-US trade deal. It's all politics. At the end of the day, like Nankunda said, nobody cares for the individual. It's not a deal that is going to benefit the individual, but just the big power. So you can see here the two largest democracies in the world, really. And then here you can see, you know, again, they talk about green transition, international relations, common values. So we have common values. We share also some values, apparently. So there is here a mention. You can see how much they talk, how much space they give to human rights. This is an entire deal. Look how much space, one line. One line to including through the bilateral human rights dialogue. That's amazing, is it? So people-to-people connection. So the real numbers are here. That's what they care for. That's it. And they don't care who is working to make this happen. So anyway, so I don't know if anyone wants to add anything else. I really wanted to have this podcast today, despite the fact that all the speakers from India, they declined to attend. None of them, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they've been invited. Some of them accepted and they declined, they canceled their attendance. And all the rest, they just declined their attendance. It would have been great to have representatives from India, representatives from the EU, but they all declined. So that's why I really wanted to have this podcast today, because we want to obviously, I think it was important to you know, talk about this issue. I don't know if any one of you wants to add anything else, if Michael would like to share his insights and thoughts on this.
Yeah, I should be better combed for this fashion discussion. I seem to have missed out on the combing this morning. There are several things that you caught my attention, and I appreciate Nankunda, your comments. Leanne, always stimulating. I hardly know where to begin, but two things that jumped out in my thinking was the impact on local people, on farmers, of the fast fashion industry that Nankunda spoke of just a moment ago. And I would, as I probably have before, I would tie that again to the advanced market of synthetic fibers, which are petrochemically produced, mainly polyester, and something between 60 and 68% of all fibers produced globally now are made of synthetics. So they're derived from oil, from the petroleum industry. And that concentrates a lot of power in the hands of those countries that are petro states. We've seen them exercise their power during the negotiation of the Global Plastics Agreement, which is stalled because of the opposition of petrostates, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, from reaching an agreement that 80% of the countries of the world, and nearly unanimity among EU member states, wishing to move forward to address synthetics, to address the petrol economy, and to tap down the plastics that are pervasively polluting the planet, including in clothing, in apparel, which are, coming back to fast fashion and Kunda's point, predominantly made of synthetic plastic. So there is an impact on farmers in East Africa and globally, in that the markets for natural fibers, which traditionally were the bulk of clothing, has been pushed aside for chemicals that are drilled in the ground in petrostates. And that's created a huge disbalance globally. It's lowered prices for natural fiber products as they've been crowded out of the market. And I don't just mean cotton. I mean, there's so many jute, flax, hemp. There's so many alternatives that could thrive and help farmers bring their crops to market, to be then woven into natural fiber materials that could then be designed locally into products that would, blossom the regional economy of places like East Africa, Uganda. And I speak from the perspective of someone who worked for 8 years in Kenya. I am part of a community-based organization in Busia County in Western Kenya that works with the Iteso community, which is largely a Ugandan community. It's one of the largest ethnic groups in Uganda, over 2 million, maybe as many as 3.5 million members, in counting also at least 500,000 in Kenya. And they are a traditional community. They have their own values. They are agricultural and also livestock raisers, not very well off. And certainly they're not benefiting from the synthetic petrol economy that globally is dominating the apparel sector. So one prescription is to return, to tilt the market back towards support for natural fiber production, and then through that to help farmers provide those crops, including farm waste, which turns out to be a fantastic source of fiber. You can recycle farm waste, that is the leftover stalks of certain crops, and then have those woven into a natural and sustainable fiber. So that's my riposte to the Petro agenda, and I thank Nankunda for bringing it up. And Leanne, your point that struck me was the importance of transparency, which supports accountability in the value chain, in production, and influences how consumers, but also decision makers, government policymakers, address the things that go into the products that we consume, the clothing that we consume, the textiles that we consume. And you've raised the point about the integration, which I think is a key word, a key concept that you've mentioned, to bring human rights, environmental impact, social justice, gender justice, all into the mix, so that this becomes transparent to people who are consuming or who are supporting through public policy the production of products. That raised an issue that comes back to the heart of the topic today, which is how these global trade agreements and the institutions that support them, in this case with India and the EU, the European Commission, the European states. But in the case of the globe, you mentioned the World Trade Organization. Actually, the World Trade Organization is on its knees right now because it's been knocked off its pedestal by the US government. And its agreements have been just shredded in this latest round of terrorism, if I could call it that. This on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again. And, you pay me if I demand it because I'm more powerful than you are. This complete nihilistic approach to trade. And in that, as an aside, I'll say, as bad as the previous regime in trade was, the so-called Washington Consensus that the World Trade Organization was an integral part of, things are far worse now, because now it's just open extortion and bullying and punishing those who don't abide by my rules, not your rules, not anything that's agreed. But coming back to the EU and India and transparency, there is a new mechanism that the EU has adopted. You mentioned labels that would, explicitly say this was sourced from this place, it was made by these people, it impacted their lives in this way, it caused this much pollution, it used this much energy, greenhouse gas emissions associated with its production, and so on. All of this you imagine it could be on a label. Well, that label would be a book. So instead of having it as a physical label, and instead of putting the burden on the end consumer, who somehow is supposed to go through the shopping rack, and read all of this, voluminous information and then make judgments about whether this is on balance a good product or a not worth buying product. There is a new technical tool called a digital product passport. And the digital product passport has been adopted by the EU 2026 through 2030, I think. It's in the process of being implemented. It's not perfect. In fact, it's very imperfect. Particularly the human rights dimension seems to be lacking. But it does provide information on source. Let's see if I can check my notes here. Origin, product origin, materials, environmental impacts, compliance across the product life cycle, rather. And so with this agreement between India and the EU, it may be that India will be caught up in the legal requirements of EU commerce to apply these standards. And in this way, trade agreements can, at certain points, actually promote the human rights and the environmental and the social justice agenda. A very imperfect example of this is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was negotiated and then renegotiated by Donald Trump during his first presidency. It's now called something different, but it's basically NAFTA plus. And during the negotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, progressive Democrats demanded that the administration, Democratic administration, incorporate the Commission on Environmental Cooperation into that agreement, a side agreement on environmental rights. And those rights then were diffused, not so importantly to Canada, which had some rights, but across Mexico, which is the third party of that North American Free Trade Agreement. And that, in some respects, did improve the performance of Mexican institutions and give Mexican workers greater scope, greater rights. Now, far from perfect, but this is an example of how sometimes trade agreements can cause the diffusion not just of bottom-feeding standards of profitability, but can actually raise human rights and environmental standards, particularly environmental standards in this case. I confess, I joined the Commission on Environmental Cooperation in a week-long seminar in Mexico City as their guest, as an advisor, as a lecturer. I don't know what to call myself, but somehow they got me to Mexico City for a week, and I had a great time. I have to say, I love Mexico, but the point being that there is sometimes some upside to these agreements. And those are the things I would try to build on. The EU is driven to this kind of agreement with India and also now with the Mercosur, the South American countries, because of its fear of the collapse of the transatlantic trading system that the United States imposed, but also collaborated with the EU on for generations. And so they are driven in the EU now by fear, which is never a good place to be. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for society. It won't bring about the legal protections that people are demanding. But that's the reality right now. People are afraid the global system has collapsed. The EU leadership is struggling to find a role for the EU, and they're reaching out to countries like India and to regions like South America to shore up their opportunities, their status, and that is driving down standards. Let's be honest about it. This is not a good development. Nobody should be pleased with that, but at least we should understand what the drivers are. Thank you.
Mike, could I
Thank
just say
you.
one thing? Yeah, could I just say one thing?
Yes, of course.
one of the things, Michael, that you brought up about the digital product passport and going back to plant-based or, textiles and getting back to a healthier, cleaner fashion industry, not not being so welcoming of the petro textiles and so forth. But the challenge is, of course, I published a paper on this and delivered the paper in New York City several years ago on the DNA mapping of in the cotton industry, where they do it at the moment of the ginning process. So you immediately know that it was ethically grown. It wasn't pesticides were not used. It was, it's all a wonderful, piece of work. And what happens is, where Kunda brought up with the farmer protectionist, philosophy of the farmer. Well, I have referenced this before in a 10-year study in Punjab, where 40,000 Punjab cotton farmers committed suicide, because what happens is the fashion industry gets a hold of the fact that, it's a better market now for plant-based textiles, virgin textiles, but they've integrated so much of the genetically modified seeding and all of that. 60% of their budgets are pesticides, and that doesn't even bring in their, the labor and all of that. And what happens is they've even gone a step further, where they actually plant nitrogen-based crops to neutralize the soil. So when somebody goes in to do the testing, it doesn't show the pesticides that have embedded into the soil. I have a very good friend who's a soil scientist. I worked with him at the Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research in Mumbai. And he was the one that told me that. He says, this is what they do. So, damned if you are, damned if you don't.
Yeah, and the seeds that you're speaking of are genetically modified, so they are so-called Roundup ready. So that
they produce poison.
They work in tandem with the chemicals, the pesticides.
Right. If you eat one of the seeds, it's the BT cotton, Bacillus thuringiensis seeds, it'll kill you.
Yeah.
So,
Cotton is the Achilles heel of natural fiber markets. Cotton's share of the market.
It was just an example, right? It was just an example, but they have the DNA mapping that can be done there. There are so many things, and I would love to see. Bring back the fiber shed concept, the true fiber shed, concepts where it would really nourish these, the Ugandan communities and so forth. But it makes way too much sense, I think.
So we can both agree, we can all agree that there are real challenges to bringing back fiber markets, and some of them are environmental and some of them are economic. But I think that that's not a reason to just raise our hands and say we give in to the petrochemical.
Exactly, Michael. Exactly.
We need to take the challenges one by one, and
right.
We need to keep in mind what Kunda has pointed out, which is that the farmers, the people in countries whose political economy is just being railroaded now by these globalized value chains of, for example, the fast fashion industry, which is deeply embedded in Europe, deeply embedded in North America. It's don't shy away from the challenge. It's a political problem among even those countries that have tools like digital product passport. And I think I haven't spoken about digital product passport before in this forum. We talked about some other things like waste trade and others, but that is at least a strategy, if an imperfect one, and something that advocates for sustainability could build on, and by getting human rights incorporated into them, for example, that would make a big difference. And again, and I come back to this, it's not just for end consumers. We all don't need PhDs to be able to understand where our products come from. You know, a few key parameters would probably motivate most people to move away from this cruel industry and adopt something better. But for policymakers, for government decision makers, for leaders, they can be pressurized, they can be motivated, they can see the light. You know, it's their jobs to think about this stuff deeply, and we can help them by providing the information and the advocacy that can change minds and change the world.
Thank you,
I'm such an
Michael.
optimist, you see, you know.
You are, but no, it's just incredible what you just shared. And but one thing I want to say concerning the human rights and the fact that this deal, this union might help also the laborers in India, because they have to, the companies have to adopt the EU rules on that. I don't believe it. I simply don't believe it to be true. And it's not going to happen, because India and the EU have been trading for billions of euros since 2020. Has been already, 6 years. I'm talking about major partnerships, and nothing has changed. We still, so I'm skeptical. I want to be optimist, and I want to agree on what you're saying, but I don't think this the EU will influence the way. And the other thing is that we already have 6,000 European companies based in India,
Yeah.
and that's what we are importing from India, textile.
Yeah. Well, in answer to that, it's up to those democratic publics in Europe to make their governments enforce these rules. And let's not be naive. Rules are great, but unenforced, no compliance, no mechanism of compliance, no transparency, and no mobilization of advocates and citizens to enforce those rules. There will always be efforts to get around them. And currently the effort at the EU level is to dumb those rules down, to weaken them, to make Europe more competitive. Great for Europe to be more competitive when it's competing with China and the United States and a few other places. But the value that we can add is to ensure that these rules do get rolled out and spread, and not be limited just to a handful of companies in Europe doing inter-European trade. So yes, there could be 6,000 European countries in India, but there's a point of entry. Pressurize those companies, make it publicly known what they're doing. As this session demonstrates, we are trying to bring some light to a really dark corner of the political economy of the global fashion industry.
And
so
reducing the opacity, really.
Reducing the opacity. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what we hope to do, and that's what we're discussing today. And some of these tools, like the ban on hazardous waste exports, which will impact plastics, and synthetic fiber economy, fast fashion, the prohibition on destroying products that have not been sold, that is apparel that's not sellable, instead of just dumping them. There are companies in Europe that for years have been just burning them, incinerating them. These practices need to be exposed, and hopefully step by step you get some reform. Nankunda, did you want to make any comments on this screed about fast fashion and natural fibers?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, concerning that, I believe right now what is happening here is right now we are mining oil. So yes, we are doing that. And I believe if you talk about that in the country that I'm in right now, it is like you're against the government. You're against the government. And also you've talked about pressurizing pressurizing them. Yes, I believe the reason to why the people that were invited got sudden flu or what, it is from that thing of pressurizing them. I think they have been doing it for a while, and I believe they have gotten the results. They have the results and they have the papers, and that is, I think, that is why some did show up here. But I believe I support that thing of, yes, regardless that they are not transitioning, they're not the pressure, of course, there are people who have set a law in motion that really we're going to do this regardless of what is happening, and that is what we are advocating for. Yes, it will not happen overnight. Yes, it will not happen overnight. That is why I believe in a just transition. Yes, I believe the more you're active in the more you grow, the more you evolve, the more you keep on moving. I believe some things will change. They will not change overnight. That is what I believe. But there will be a just transition, one step on that. I believe even those who have not attended, or I believe they are active in India, they are activists in Uganda and East Africa, that they are campaigning against the synthetic and the natural products. But of course, sometimes you have to think about your family and be like, okay, this thing, I love it, but I think it is a process. I will not put too much energy because I still need to be able to advocate for this thing. But the point you're talking about is good, and literally people advocating for it here, and I believe we will have results. Yes, that is what I believe, because there's not energy wasted for those people. Sorry for my background, but I believe we are not wasting time, and opportunities like this, platforms like this that advocate for those things to be heard, it is really pushing the agenda of those maybe activists that cannot be heard, like on a national level, international level. But opportunities like this, maybe I get this opportunity, I speak, and you get this opportunity to speak it out. The knowledge that I've gotten from here, of course, I'm going to go back and say, this is happening. This is what I've learned from here. Yeah, and I believe the transition will happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nakunda. Thank you to all of you. I think just the best one showed up today of all my guest list. I just got the best ones showing up today. And it's really very strategic what we heard today. Obviously, the episode will be published on YouTube channel. It's already live streaming, and will be published on Spotify and LinkedIn as well. I would like to investigate further. I don't think today is just the beginning of something, that we need to investigate further. I would like to reach out and see actually the 6,000 companies, European companies based in India, try to investigate a little bit more and to check if they are applying the local rules or the European rules when it's down to, human rights and actually how they treat their laborers. Well, don't know. There is
one thing that I would like to say is, to be honest with you, if anybody's ever landed on a plane in Mumbai, you can smell the air pollution. When you land, before you even get out of the plane. And then, you get in your the car and so forth, and you just look around and think about all these companies that are embedded in India that are doing world-class business with India. And the manholes in India are the size of a semi-truck, okay? So, you can talk big about restore, renew, revitalize, blah, 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 but it's just mind-boggling. So I think that's a great idea, finding the 6,000, whatever.
So let's investigate further.
It's an extractive foundation. Basically, that's what it boils down
No, I
to.
just would like to investigate further so we can, gather again. We can regroup again in a couple of months.
Yeah, in
after
Nakunda, I'm speaking in Edmonton, Canada in June, and the director of the Sustainable Fashion Guild there is from Uganda. So I'm gonna catch up with you after this, and I'm going to invite you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
So you can be my sidekick.
Great. Well, thank you very much for today. And once again, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Liane. Thank you, Nankunda. It's really, your contribution is precious. And let's regroup again once this deal will become effective. And let's see if we can find out all these European companies, who they are, what kind of industry they are in, and how they are faring in India. Well, thank you very much for being here.
Great seeing everybody. Michael, be well.
And I'll see you soon. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
ਨੀਵੀਆਂ ਤੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਚੀਰ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਪੱਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁਖੜਾ ਲੁਕਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਨੀਵੀਆਂ ਤੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਚੀਰ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਪੱਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁਖੜਾ ਲੁਕਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਐਵੇਂ ਕਰੀ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਚ ਕੇ ਰਹੀ